huge thank you to everyone who's joined for today for our webinar around how accessible is online working. I'm Sarah Bell. I'm a lecturer at the University of Exeter in health geography. I'm based at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health. Most of my work focuses on links between nature, health and well-being in relation to disability and social inclusion. But today I'm here with my Inclusivity Project hat on. And we've got a great sort of a mix of speakers and participants today, so hopefully it will be a good session. Just by way of very brief background, the Inclusivity Project is funded by the European Regional Development Fund. It's a collaboration, hang on, trying to operate my words. It's a collaboration between the University of Exeter, between the Local Enterprise Partnership for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, Disability Cornwall and Isles of Scilly, and Age UK, with additional advice from the South West Academic Health Science Network. So the project seeks to really develop our understanding of disability, older age and long-term health or illness in the SME workplace, so small and medium-sized enterprises. Specifically, it's really trying to understand how we can enhance and support more socially inclusive SME workplace practices and policies in collaboration with business owners, older workers, disabled workers, and individuals with long-term or chronic health conditions. Obviously, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the context for the project and the systems that we all work in more generally have massively changed. So in light of that, the project is also really trying to understand how best to support SMEs in building social inclusion into current efforts to adapt to these unpredictable system-wide changes in the future. So in response to the pandemic, the project team has been running a new webinar season around well-being, business and inclusion, including this one. So, so today, really, we're trying to think about the accessibility of online working. Obviously, the rapid shift to remote working and online events caused by coronavirus has to some extent made them more accessible to people. But is there a risk of replacing one type of exclusion for another? And what do we need to know to make our work and events accessible to all? So in today's session, we have a great mix of speakers and opportunities for breakout participant discussions. So we're testing out Zoom's breakout function. And hopefully we can really think about and discuss the accessibility of different technologies, perhaps offer some practical tips, and consider how the current lockdown experience might encourage new workplace practices. Also here from the project, we have Ruth Gripper, who's our Business Engagement Knowledge Exchange Officer on the project. We have Lucy Wright, who's the project administrator and is the tech guru for today. So any kind of queries you have about the tech, please do ask Lucy. I think she comes up as the Inclusivity Project is her kind of her box within the box on Zoom. We've got Vaughan Temby, who's the Community Engagement Manager from Disability Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. We have Helen Newsom, Business Engagement Officer, Age UK, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And we have Claire Harris, who's from the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Local Enterprise Partnership. So just a few things up front around housekeeping. Videos can be on or off depending on your preference and obviously bandwidth. So please go with what you feel most comfortable with. Please try to keep microphones muted unless you're speaking, just so that we don't get too many dogs or whatever kind of background noises tend to kind of fly in and out of the picture. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions or to raise any tech issues. We're all kind of learning how this tech works. Zoom seems to be changing daily. Yesterday we had captioning facilities, now we don't, so we're not quite sure what's going on with that. But we're trying to make this as accessible as possible. And obviously if the chat box doesn't work or you can't access it for some reason, please do just unmute and speak. And yeah, we'd rather that you do that and can participate than get lost trying to find a chat box. So yes, please feel free just to come and go as you need. You know, if you need to make a cup of tea at some point, it's no problem. You might want to mute and turn off your video if you do, but yeah, that's just, yeah. And the main thing is we want this to be a safe space to share, to chat, to learn from each other. We all bring different experiences and different backgrounds to this virtual room. So yeah, trying to just be open-minded and respectful in when we're talking would be great. So I think I'm just going to briefly introduce the agenda. So we've got, as I said, 4 fab speakers. Tigger Pritchard will be kicking us off. Then we have Tanvir Bush. Then we'll have a brief time for some Q&A before moving on to Ben Bolton and Julie Hawker. Obviously, I'll introduce each properly as we get going. And then around 11, we'll try and break out into our breakout group and have some discussion around some questions before feeding back. And then Ruth will provide some information about the types of business support that the Inclusivity Project can provide as well towards the end. So that, I think, is that in a whistle stop. We'll come back to that as a sort of small group discussion type topics we'll be thinking about. But I think, unless there's any immediate questions, we will get going. So to kick things off for the next 10 minutes, we have our first speaker, Tigger Pritchard. Thanks so much for joining us.
That's okay, hi.
I'm going to hand over to you, stop sharing my screen and mute myself. I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. A quick 10 minutes, I think, because normally people that know me know I can go on for ages. My name's Tigger Pritchard. I wear various hats. The biggest one I do really is the Autism Coffee Shop, which is to do with the awesome world of autism, neurodiversity. There's training, there's podcasts, there's an awesome Facebook page. Please join, but turn off your notifications as I share loads of stuff about neurodiversity and autism all the time. The other hat I wear is that I'm chair of the National Autistic Society in Cornwall. Also neurodiverse myself, as are many members of my family. So autism is something I'm extremely passionate about, and certainly from an inclusive viewpoint. So, hello. I'm kind of new to Zoom as well, but I'm getting used to it. I said earlier on, please forgive me, I've got a dual screen set up. If you see my eyes up there, and you see the whites on my eyes, I humbly apologize. I'm still trying to sort it out. And my visual prompt is in front of me on my smaller laptop. So, COVID-19, I'd done a visual aid for myself, and the first thing I wrote down was, has it been autism friendly? And this is something I wanted to look at, and really in the 10 minutes I've got, I do want to quickly talk about the world of autism and what people think about the world of autism, because if you think differently about the world of autism, that automatically makes you more inclusive. Definitely there have been massive problems for all of us, especially for people on the awesome autism spectrum, because of what COVID has changed in our daily lives. And I'm just going to think and muse quickly upon my thoughts about work and accessibility and how COVID-19 has changed this and maybe in some ways made it better. I'll come back to that. And then a bit about suggestions and signposts. I will put details in, and I'll mention some websites that are good places to go to, but it's usually the National Autistic Society to start off with and to go from there. So autism, we all have a picture of what autism is. And I'm going to say that for a lot of people, that picture is wrong. So, because it's based on media, it's based on a medical model. And if you change that perception, you automatically make yourself more gorgeously inclusive. So one way of looking at it is it's a brain difference. Some people do the operating systems. You've got computers, you've got Apple on one, Windows on another, those kind of analogies there as well. But it's really a difference in brain development that really affects an individual and how they perceive and experience the world around them. And that's huge. If you look at the National Autistic website, they say that maybe 1 in 100 individuals are awesomely autistic. A lot of research across the globe will say it's lower than that. Maybe even 1 in 50 or less. Now that is huge. That's a huge percentage of the population in Cornwall alone that is awesomely autistic and has interest in and different accessible needs and so on. You may have heard as well, oh, we're a little bit autistic. You're not, we're not. Though I could go on about this for hours as well, as many individuals would. A lot of present research indicates that autism is predominantly genetic. And a vast percentage looks at that. That being the case, you either have a brain that is awesomely autistic or a brain that is awesomely neurotypical or neurodiverse, etc. So you cannot be a little bit autistic. You can have a bit of traits and so on, and understand sensory stuff or the need for routines and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, a person who's awesomely autistic, their brain is different. So that was somebody with that label of signpost of neurodiverse. Though I have not a neurotypical. Though I have no idea what normal is anyway in most days. At the end of the day, it's often interpreted as issues around routine and structure and communication and sensory differences. So individuals are often viewed of needing routine, needing structure, needing really clear aspects of communication, and the sensory world can be extremely devastating at times. But that label or signpost of autism is more often than not seen as a disadvantage. Now, there's a sea change at the moment across the globe where there's argues against that. There's debates, there's research projects and so on. So one thought is it a disadvantage? Or is it a disadvantage because of the expectation levels in certain environments and certain cultural and expectation levels from, neurotypicals in terms of technology, communication, entering shops, going to workplaces, so on and so forth? And are those expectation levels sometimes devastatingly complex and anxiety-laden and disabling to individuals who are awesomely autistic? What you often get is a spectrum line, and you get people where you get, autism at one end that need a lot of help and no language and so on, and you get people with Asperger's who are really intelligent. That's, again, an older view of autism. It's really a massive spectrum. We have individuals that might have issues across the board with communication and sensory processing and structure and routine and the need for repetitive behaviors and stimming and so on and so forth. I'll put some links in, if I may, which I'll type up in the chat, which will send you some areas to expand upon this. So what happened in the lockdown? Everything changed. I personally, as I'm sure many of you did, was shocked. I prepared for it, I thought, but I hadn't prepared for life at home. I had to move in with a partner. Actually, I wasn't prepared for that at all, and family life and so on. So for so many individuals, it's been a massive, incredible, terrible, devastating shock, because everything we took to be normal, and for individuals that I know and love, those routines, those structures, those everyday experiences were gone, disappeared. And with that, you had a huge raise in anxiety, a huge raise in mental health issues, and continually, and so on as well. So working and accessing from home, this is all new. And with that, extra challenges are faced as well. I've had to create a workspace. I've had to learn to go online, as we have, as you said earlier on, we're still learning about Zoom and where to look and whether, the cameras work and whether it's an uncluttered background and so on and so forth. So for some individuals, their new normal is a box. My new normal and workplace is this box in the corner of my bedroom. Here's all my equipment, everything I need, the laptops, mics, all that stuff. And this is now where I work. And it's incredibly different what I used to do, which is going out and doing stuff. Now, again, with that, if you're in a family environment, those individuals are stressed and anxious and so on and so forth. They're having to work from home or not work from home or not go to school and so on and so forth. And that's had a lot of issues as well. But also not just entering lockdown, leaving lockdown is incredibly anxiety laden. And I'm going to be honest here as well. Those daily updates freak the heebie-jeebies out of me and so many people I know, because advice seems to change from day to day. And when you're trying to get structure and trying to get consistency, boom, it's changed a week later and you don't know what's going on. And that's really scary. But if you have individuals who are awesomely autistic and they have differences in perception and communication and the need for routine and the need for structure and so on, then a lot of environments individuals would have accessed that would have been anxiety laden are no longer accessible. Shops opened yesterday, and I live in Bodmin. I went to the high street just to look, and it was packed with people running into shops, social distancing, standing in queues and so on. And you've seen images from across Cornwall and Britain and the world in general, so to speak, of people accessing shops for the first time. So for a lot of individuals, that anxiety-laden part of our community has disappeared. The anxiety around shops, and workplace environments, going to meetings, going to have interviews at the job centre, so on and so forth. They were laden with huge amounts of anxiety from a communication, from a sense of viewpoint and so on. That's changed, and that could have changed for the better. Because for a lot of individuals, if they're in control of this environment, and we may have to exclude what else is going on, but if they're in control of this environment, then the smells, the taste, the communication issues and so on are not going to happen to the extent that they did. So it could be that accessibility is improved for some individuals. Those face-to-face meetings that we would have taken part in, for so many people I know, they are absolutely petrifying. You don't know the questions somebody's going to ask, you don't know what's going to go on, you don't know how they're going to smell, the brightness of the room, so on and so forth. That will have changed, maybe for the better, as we now enter this online world more and more and more. So thinking about it, working and accessing from home, for some individuals, maybe more advantageous. Okay, you could have the kit, you could have the bandwidth. You're going to say to other people, which I had to do, could you not go on the PlayStation? I'm doing this, could you please kind of like, just not go on the PlayStation for 4 hours? What? Yeah, imagine saying that to a teenager. That in itself is anxiety laden, yeah? But at times we have to do it. I've had to do it. For me, there was initial monetary outlay to get the kit that I needed. What if you haven't got that? What if you've just got a mobile phone and the microphone doesn't work? And you don't know about, the bandwidth. Well, I live in Bodmin. To ring on my mobile phone, I have to leave the flat that I live in and walk about 4 or 5 meters down the road. So the technological issues around accessibility as well. But from my viewpoint, for a lot of individuals and a lot of feedback I'm getting, they are saying to me, with my various hats on, that for some aspects of it, it's become easier. There's the bigger picture, technology, the Wi-Fi, the additional issues in the house, as we've said, so on and so forth. And also our newness to this, our lack of consistency, our lack of understanding structure, our newness to communication, to making sure we're lit properly, to make sure there's no massive visual clutter behind us, or that we're not covering our hands and so on when we're talking, because we're not used to looking into a webcam. One interesting thing I had, and a lot has happened for me, a lot of individuals with children have said to me, with children who are awesomely neurodiverse, that they're not going to go back to school because they're finding their children are learning and growing far more productively at home than they ever were at school. That's interesting. And that's something I've discussed nationwide on other podcasts with other individuals, which I think is an interesting insight into what's going on. So one part of me thinks that there is less stress and less anxiety to a certain degree. And with that, maybe from a work-based viewpoint, more productivity. I've got a friend of mine who works for the National Health, correlating data. An awesome neurodiversity man. He has said that he can do so much more work at home than he ever used to do in the office, because in the office there was background clutter, there was the sensory issues, there's understandings around communication and so on and so forth. So part of me thinks that this is going to be better for a lot of individuals, but there are a lot of things that get in the way, and sometimes what gets in the way is us, or maybe lack of understanding of the individual, of autism, of neurodiversity. So one of the things I think of to a certain degree is that it's changed, and it's changed forever, I think. A lot of my work was talking, was conferences, was seeing people. I don't know when I'm going to go to a conference again. I'm booked on some next year, but I don't know if I want to go. There's that fear aspect of whether or not it's going to be safe and so on and so forth. So one thing I do think is that for any organization, any individual, this is the tips, the ideas bit, yeah. So much gets in the way in the autism world, and please research more. And that's my first tip, really, is learn about all those aspects of neurodiversity. And in my world, autism and autism culture, listen to autistic individuals who say this is what it's like. If you're working with somebody directly, if you have a chance, ask them how they prefer the communication to be. And it may be just as it was in a room on face-to-face, forgive me, the light can't be too bright. Something can't get in the way. And you might not think that because you may be looking at a screen or just have a phone and not be able to see the images that everybody else can, and so on and so forth. My apologies about that. Or it may be that you're busy fiddling with the camera and that gets in the way. So ask the person you're working with, you're communicating with, how they like to communicate. You've got a chance now, maybe, via email, via initial chat. As you said here, you can say to some people, you don't have to have the camera on. I've got the dual screen, you're there. So when I look at you talking, I go up and you see the whites of the eyes, which is very scary, or my nasal hairs, which is even worse. But ask people how they prefer the communication process to happen. but we've also got to learn about how we present visually. If you're a signer, for example, which is something I do a lot, then you need to be seen from a body viewpoint. You need to have a webcam placed in a different environment. You need to think about how your body positions, how you turn your face, and so on and so forth. You need to think how cluttered your PowerPoint might be. We so often have PowerPoints that are full of logos and where we're from. Sorry, but sometimes that's visual clutter for some people. They just need to look at an off-white image, easy read kind of ideas, so on and so forth. And I think that we now have a chance from a technological viewpoint, if people are able to access it, to give as much information as possible to cope with change, to cope with uncertainty.
One more minute, sorry.
Thank you. I've got it on my, I'm on the last slide here. I've got it on my phone, where I'm counting down on my phone as well. I've pressed start on my phone. So I think that giving as much information as possible can help and support individuals, but learn about neurodiversity and learn about the person you're communicating with, in the hope that they can educate you as well. Now, I'm really looking forward to the question and answers. I'll stop there as my countdown is going as well. Hope that was of use, but please feel free to contact me independently. I am happy to natter with various hats on. And I'm looking forward to the presentations as well. And thank you.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thanks so much, Tigger. You covered so much there. It was brilliant. Hopefully it's got some brain cells sparking. So I'm going to hand us over to Tanvir Bush now. Thanks so much for joining us. Tanvir is a novelist, a researcher, and is affiliated with Bath Spa University. So I think, Tanvir, if you're all set, I might hand over.
Can you see and hear me? You can.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay. Trigger just has really said a huge amount of really important and useful stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm visually impaired, and I'm also I'm a very visual person. So this is a really interesting space for me to be, with lockdown and being online. But I was going to say that I've actually, I am a researcher on a project called the D4D project, but I've been furloughed. So, so all my very posh slides and things, I'm afraid I'm not using. I am just going to be a talking head today. And I'm going to be talking about my more personal experiences. I will mention one particular project with D4D towards the end, because I think it's a pretty exciting one and something that everyone might end up hearing about over time. So I just wanted to say that before lockdown, there were some issues that I always had with conferences and meetings. And the first one was not being able to read the badges. So you go into a room, everyone that everyone's got badges on saying who they are, and immediately, if you're visually impaired or you've got a particular issue with sight, you are not going to feel comfortable, because you're just not going to have the ability to kind of move towards the people that you might need to move towards. I also have hyperacusis, which is quite common with people with visual impairment, where noise is really, really problematic. So in a room where lots of people are talking and networking, I find that very difficult. And I should imagine that a lot of people that Trigger works with too find that extremely difficult. So networking is problematic. Slides, and as Trigger mentioned, people were always using slides. Not before we went online, people weren't thinking about audio describing photographs, and a lot of people use their slides for themselves, which is fine. But if they're also needing you to process large amounts of information on slides and not reading them through, again, you're leaving a lot of people at a disadvantage. And of course, the worst thing about conferences, if you're visually impaired, is the buffets. Because you can't find where the coffee is, and it's just a disaster. You're always having to beg for help and those kinds of things. Buffets just drive me nuts. So going online into this space, and a lot of the issues that I had previously are the same. So I can't see clearly any of the people up on the screen. Unless people are introduced, and thank you, Sarah did a brief introduction at the beginning, I won't know who is in the space with me. I am also aware that obviously working from home, you don't have the buffet, but you're going to be doing lots of snacking, which is a problem. Slides, again, slides are still being used a lot. I was in a really difficult meeting for 2 hours and was expected to be following along with a database, and there was no stopping. And all of us, I think, probably had to lie down afterwards. It was horrific. So there's lots of things that are still the same. However, and again, Tigger mentioned this, I don't have to travel. I don't have to have the anxiety of going to new spaces and trying to work my way as a visually impaired person around new spaces. I am in my safe space, which is cluttered, I apologize. And that whole anxiety of public transport, which can be very exhausting for people. So by the time they get to a meeting, they're already again at a disadvantage. That has gone. However, the other side of that is with Zoom and with these, you are there on, like on television. So there's nowhere to hide. And for people who experience anxiety, especially around public speaking, that can be really frightening to feel these eyes on you, the gaze on you the entire time. So just check it through, so slides. And one of the key things I found, I work with all the work that I've done with disabled folk, is that the processing of information means that we tend to be more exhausted all the time. And one of the great things that we are learning about with these online meetings is we can turn off, we can shut down the mic if it's inappropriate and the meeting organizers are inclusive. We can step away from the screen. We can just use different sensors so we're not overloading all the time, which is very useful. And of course, you've got the thing with dogs and children in the background. I remember watching a supervision with somebody trying to handle a 2-year-old having a meltdown, which was amazing. She handled it beautifully. The only meetings I have seen with both BSL and captioning have been those meetings that have been organised by other disabled people, certainly to begin with. And I include myself in that because myself and a colleague ran an inclusive research workshop, but we weren't given the funding, even though we had asked for it, for BSL and captioning. So already we are trying to do an inclusive researcher workshop, and we've failed at the first hurdle because the university couldn't provide the funding. So there's an irony there. And given that 1 in 5 people are disabled, it seems crazy that one of the biggest minorities in the world is not being, sort of really at the forefront and not being counted for in all these different environments. So it's really exciting to see that people are beginning to do that. I've found with my other projects that I run a community creative writing group. I'm also part of a Buddhist group that for so many people without the tech, and again, Tigger was talking about tech, they are shut down and shut away, then they don't have a voice, they can't get online. And, WhatsApp and other phone, sort of different ways of using tech is all very well, but actually it's still not enough for a lot of the people out there, especially people who are older or who may just find, again, technology generally overwhelming. Also, another thing that Tigger mentioned, which I think is really important, is that COVID, yes, there was this immediate kind of weight around the kind of, it's an existential anxiety. There's pandemic going on all around, and yet, you know, at the same time, unless you are directly involved with, you know somebody who's been ill, there's a very unreal sensation, unreal feeling about it all. And so we're in and going back into the real world, the normal world, is causing as much anxiety for many people as leaving it in the first place. And for many disabled people who were finally seen, who were, you know, able to say, look, you know, we've often isolated anyway, and we can help, and we can talk about these things, and you can use us to learn more tech and learn about ways to be inclusive. We're very worried that we're going to then be left behind again when people go back into the economy, the world of work and panic buying and all that stuff. So one of the things that I was going to just quickly mention was that with the D4D project. D4D is the project that there's about 8 different universities involved, looking at how disabled people communicate and experience their communities. And just before lockdown, we were using a telepresence robot, which is basically like a big iPad, but it's on a wheeled device, so that the person can manipulate it from their living room. So it's like Skype on a stick, but you can move it around yourself. And we managed to get this telepresence robot to the Hastings Contemporary Art Gallery. And the idea was that people who were in lockdown and who were isolated on shielding would be able to visit the art gallery, use the computer, the Skype on a stick, the telepresence robot, to move themselves around the gallery and look at all the different works of art. And they could do it in groups. Several people could come on like a Zoom group and have this experience as a group. Now that, again, is very exciting, and it could be about inclusion, but we're also looking at the fact that actually, could it just be reinforcing the shielding and reinforcing the fact that we can do all this stuff from our own homes? So therefore, maybe disabled people don't need to go into the workplace and don't need to be seen. And the fact that we are already so underrepresented and so have been so shut away, certainly over the last 10 years, you know, again, there's this fear that reinforcing the fact that everyone can work from home may be damaging in some way in the long run to having people out there and represented. I hope that makes sense. And I know I've really burbled through this, and I do apologize. I do like my flashy slides, and I feel a bit lost without them, but I think that's probably enough from me for the moment.
That was fantastic, and not burbly at all, very articulate. Thank you. We were going to have a mini Q&A now, but I think just because we're over a bit, I'm going to carry on, and then we'll just have a combined Q&A at the end of all the talks, if that's all right. But please do keep typing in questions in the chat box, and then I can pick them up after we've had
Oh, Sarah, can I just mention one last thing? Sorry,
yes,
the chat box, again, for visually impaired people is not a possible thing. So just to let you know, it's very difficult to access.
This is very useful to know. Well, you can also just unmute and speak, because I think in participants you can raise your hand, but then the icon for actually finding the raise hand function is also tiny. It's helpful. Okay, brilliant. So either put notes in a chat box, or we will come back to questions in a bit. So I think Sarah, I'm going to hand over. Yes.
Could you just show everybody where the chat box is, if that's a useful tool for them?
Yeah, it should be. So in the bottom of your Zoom screen, in the middle, there should be a little icon that says chat. There's like a speech bubble and an icon that says chat, and hopefully if you click on that, it should open up the chat box. For me, it opens up on the right hand side. I don't know if that's the same for everybody else.
That's where mine is, yeah. Thanks.
Great. No, that's great. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to pass over to Ben Bolton, who is Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Digital Skills Partnership Coordinator, and hopefully he can tell you a little bit more about what that involves and what you've been up to. So thanks ever so much for joining us.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. So having digital skills in my title sets me up for a huge failure. I struggle just the same as everyone else in terms of this new way of working. It is a challenge. It's a challenge for us all. So please bear with me. In terms of the Digital Skills Partnership, very, very briefly, we're established by the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport with a view to trying to enable digital skills across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. There are also 5 other partnerships that operate across the UK, one of which is our nearest neighbour in the heart of the Southwest. Julie, who will be speaking next, actually chairs that group. So we are trying to tackle a range of issues by better understanding what the needs are and better provision. Inclusivity has always been a cross-cutting theme for the Digital Skills Partnership, but as you can imagine, over the last 3 to 4 months, it's been thrust front and centre in everything that we do. And I think it's really important to recognise right off the bat, really, this is a complex issue. This isn't something that's going to be solved by just finding millions of pounds to put kit into people's homes. There's a whole range of issues around this, from accessibility to trust, confidence. Affordability is clearly an issue. We talk about connection a lot in Cornwall. We also talk about the availability of hardware. But above and beyond all of that, there is also a really important skills issue that we need to focus on. And we know people are excluded simply because they don't have the skills they need to go online and to participate. We also know that these issues are exacerbated with the elderly population, with those who are in areas of higher degree of poverty or deprivation, and also, as we've heard today, people with disability are also excluded far more from this area of work. In terms of Cornwall, we know that across the whole community, there are approximately 10% of the population that have no access to the online world. So that equates to about 65,000 people. Interestingly, if you take national research that was recently published by Lloyd's, if you take the national figure, they've researched that in actual fact, 48% of those who aren't currently online have zero motivation or no interest in going online, no matter what we do to support them. However, I still think if we can demonstrate the benefits and remove barriers, we can still have an impact on that. So there's a whole community dimension to this. And why is it important? Well, we've already heard from the 2 speakers why it's important. It can have a massive impact upon health outcomes. It can have a massive impact upon social exclusion, isolation, loneliness. It can also have a massive impact upon financial exclusion. We know from the research that people who aren't able to go online are actually paying more for things like utility bills. They are excluded from online ways of working, which do bring financial benefits and are an awful lot easier for many people. So if we take this into the modern era, we've all changed massively the way in which we're working currently. Some of it has been good, some of it not so good, some of it has just been downright challenging for many people. And I think it's really important that we reflect on that. We are moving into what everybody's terming a new normal. Again, I think that comes with positives and negatives. We just need to have our eyes open and really understand what bits we want to keep and what bits we need to change for the future. And digital, I believe, is a key part in that conversation. So if we look at this in terms of our enforced working from home, I think there's both an individual perspective to this, an interesting conversation. Also, there's a corporate part to this conversation as well. So in terms of the individual, we've already heard very, very eloquently from our last two speakers some of the barriers that exist for people in terms of working from home. Some of those will be around connectivity, hardware, software, ability to use it. Some of those will just be around physical space, also around space that is actually suitable for working for 8 hours. I don't know about anybody else, but I spend hours every day now on video calls, and it does definitely have an impact upon your physiology and the way you feel. So I'm just investing in a new office chair. It's something that I feel is really important. If I'm going to be doing this, and it looks like I will be for some time to come, it's important that we are set up properly. I think from an individual perspective, one of the most important aspects, though, is motivation. It comes up in lots of the research, but I'm absolutely guilty of this in the past. Video conferencing has been available for many years. However, I've resisted it. It's not something I feel particularly comfortable with. It certainly raises anxiety levels in me, and it's something that it's just not felt like a viable option for me. However, now we're forced to do it. And actually, having overcome the initial anxiety, I've found it to be a very positive experience. Some of the things Tigger was talking about earlier about not having to go face to face, not having to go into crowded environments, not having to be seen in the office just because it's important to be in the office. I can work just as well from here as I can from other places. That's not to say it's wholly a right solution. So motivation is key, and we're finding that in terms of the data, there has been a real increase in people's motivation to actually embrace digital technology for work. Partly that's enforced, they've not had a choice, but actually it's proven this technology does work. The fact we're sat all around Cornwall and beyond today, all talking together, just demonstrates this does work. So from an individual perspective, there's lots of different challenges, but there's also lots of benefits as well. We just need to be really mindful of that. In terms of the corporate, we deal with lots of SMEs. It's really important to say, if you think about Cornwall's economic climate, we are dominated by small businesses. We have significant levels of part-time employment. All of those contributing factors do have an impact on people's digital skills. We know that people working in small businesses have lower levels of digital skills. We also know people working part-time will generally have lower levels of digital skills and less investment in those skills. In terms of the corporate sector, this has been thrust upon them just as much as it's been thrust upon us. They've had to find new ways of working, both for their employees, but also if they're client-facing or customer-facing, whole new business models for the way in which they work. From a positive perspective, what we have seen working with businesses in Cornwall is real innovation and creativity. Some of the businesses, some of the ideas that we're seeing so that they've been able to keep working and to keep people in jobs has been absolutely incredible. We've also seen massive increase in pace around actually transformation programs that were due to take 2 years. Suddenly they've been done in 10 days. So the brakes have been let off. That's got to be a good thing. I work in and around the public sector. That's got to be a good thing. We've proved we can do it. In terms of corporates, I think it's really important that they understand they have that duty of care, both for the physical and the mental health of their employees. That poses numerous challenges for somebody who is managing a team, but it's something they need to be aware of. The other thing that I think is really important to mention, this crisis has really thrown up very clearly a need for better planning and strategy around business, full stop, but around digital skills around business and digital strategy. We're finding that lots of businesses have had to do this on the fly. They haven't been prepared for it. However, they are realizing now that lots of the solutions they've implemented, they're kind of wishing they did it a little while ago because they've been very effective. So in terms of future productivity and future work practices, I think that we do need to think differently. We're entering a new way of working. I think we're entering a new way of being, in fact. And we really need to think what works and what doesn't. Over the last couple of months, we've been doing a lot in and around the care sector. Again, if we think about those groups that are excluded, care really does feature very, very highly. And again, I think coming back to Tigger's point, we need to think about what the personalised care is that people need. So we prescribe a digital solution as well. If you're excluded, you need a tablet with a SIM card. In actual fact, that's not the case for many people. That doesn't fit their requirements. So with the industry in Cornwall, we're beginning to think about actually what alternative solutions are there that might be better for particular audience groups, for particular client groups. So for instance, there's lots of investigation around voice and the use of voice to control devices and access services. So in summary, I think digital has really come to the fore in the last 3 months. I think digital exclusion, it's not a new issue. It's been around since digital was created. However, this has really demonstrated what an issue this is. It's also demonstrated the complexity. I get phone calls every day and video calls, obviously, from people who are working with clients who they can no longer talk to because actually they don't have a device or they don't have connectivity. So it's a massive issue. However, the counter argument is if we just threw a device in their direction, would that solve the problem? And I think in many cases, it wouldn't actually solve the problem. It's far more complex. So I think in closing, I think there's something to be said around geography. Physical location has become much less important. There's something to be said about innovation, creativity. I think the SME sector has shown real innovation and creativity in Cornwall. I think in a lot of cases, staff have also been looked after, but I'm sure that's not universal. We can all find exceptions to that rule. But we've got to think about our staff in this new model of working, their physical and their emotional well-being. And I think the third and final point I'd like to make is around needing to base digital solutions on real need, not just what's easy for us to buy, what's easy for us to train. It's actually about what is the right solution for the particular client group we're working with. And we've seen that so strongly within health and care sector. So apologies, that's a real whistle-stop tour of the Digital Skills Partnership world. This is a massive issue for us. I know some of you on this call are heavily involved in working in this field. So keep up the good work and look forward to any questions or comments.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, I know, I feel like we almost need a whole day for this rather than an hour and a half, but we shall, hopefully it's just the start of something. Brilliant, that was great. So I'm going to hand over to Julie now, who is joint CEO of Cosmic, an ethical IT business which specialises in website development, IT training courses, business consultancy, tech support, digital marketing and search engine optimization. So over to Julie, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, so I'm Joint Chief Exec at Cosmic. My colleague Kate Doodson might be known to many of you who shares the Chief Exec and all the work that we do in that role with me. And as Ben just mentioned, I also chair the equivalent body, the Digital Skills Partnership here in the heart of the Southwest, which is the geography that covers Devon and Somerset, Plymouth and Torbay. And so I'm going to steer away from duplicating a content that Ben's really well covered in terms of the work of the Digital Skills Partnership and focus on our work at Cosmic. But before I take that approach, I'd just like to comment, from the Heart of the Southwest Partnership level, that we're not doing nearly enough yet in terms of inclusivity and the work that we need to address on this agenda needs to ramp up rapidly in the months ahead, would be my main reflection at this time. We've looked very strongly at skills to support economic growth, to support employability, which of course, you know, has an inclusivity angle to it, but I think we've got to, you know, being invited to participate today has given me a real and very well-timed reminder that inclusivity is not nearly high enough up our agenda, and I'll definitely be taking that back to our partnership discussion. So I'm going to talk to a few slides in a moment, but before I do that, just a bit of a backdrop to COSMIC and our work. COSMIC was set up in the mid-1990s to address something that we started calling digital inclusion. So just to emphasize that point that Ben just made, that digital inclusion is nothing new and has been around, and indeed it was the main rationale for setting up COSMIC off the back of a recession in the mid-90s, looking at, you know, the needs of people who were disadvantaged in all shapes and sizes in their use of digital. And that's been our work for 25 years now. And we have continued to challenge ourselves and others, so using our position to influence others as to their approach to digital inclusion and the disadvantage which digital obviously creates for individuals across our society. So rather than bore you with 25 years worth of examples, I thought it would be most relevant to talk about current example of our work and a particular project. So I'm going to talk about Positive People, which is a particular project we're running in the heart of the Southwest area. But then I want to share with you a case study that has benefited an individual, but has also influenced in many ways. And then to talk about a particular partnership. So I'm going to switch on the screen sharing functionality now and hope that my slides pass the visibility test for those of you who need them to. Let me just put slideshow on over there and then share that screen and move that out of the way. So is that working now for everybody? Is that?
I've got a sort of blurry screen saying slideshow, resume slideshow. Ah, that's better. Yes.
Yeah, sometimes it lags a bit, Sarah. So is everyone now able to see the COSMIC branded slide with today's date on it? Is that okay?
I can definitely see that one. Hopefully others can too, but I'll mute and shout if you can't. Okay, hopefully we're good.
I'll definitely speak to the content as we go through as well. So please don't worry if either you can't view it because of connectivity or indeed my slides aren't designed well enough for you to digest the content. I'll talk through what's on the slide. So yes, I gave you the backdrop to COSMIC and our work and this question of how accessible is online working. And like I say, I'm going to address this from a set of slides developed by my colleagues working on a particular project that is called Positive People. And what they were already doing this before crisis. Let me first stress that. They were already working with individuals and asking questions about, you know, accessibility and ways in which their accessibility challenges were being met and not met. So, you know, looking at a growing number of ways in which that team can help individuals has been on there. This project is now into its 4th year of delivery. So, you know, developing and increasingly developing their approaches to support people with this range of needs and many more. So these are just examples of help that's been offered in this project. And I asked Simon, my colleague who was helping me to prepare for today, I asked him to share with me, you know, those things that he feels have definitely increased in demand in the last 3 months. And the one that came top of this list was the use of voiceover or screen reader technology as definitely one that has received a higher level of support during the crisis period of the last 3 months, and, you know, on all sorts of devices, actually helping people to access VoiceOver and screen reader across all types of devices. So not just laptops and PCs, but also a wide range of phones, and the importance of understanding how to navigate these devices using gestures. And again, the gestures vary across devices. So Simon's commentary here is that, you know, we need a tutorial that covers off a wide range of devices and technology. So some of the things I got an education preparing for today, which was really good for me to revisit some of these things. So Simon was describing to me, you know, how a Google and Android, a Microsoft phone and iPhone would all have slightly different settings and therefore a different guide. And then other support, sorry, move on. Yeah, these slides are just going to demonstrate where these things come in. Other support on visual impairment in particular are regularly receiving support requests. So whether that's magnification of the screen or speech to text dictation is coming up quite a lot. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the functionality, but I think it was useful for me to stress today that the level of inquiry and need for support around these things has definitely increased when people were expected to do more online and across the last 3 months. And it's important, you know, Simon's dropped in the note that he usually puts on his workshops, which is not all devices have all of these features, or they might have different names. So initial assessments, initial assessment work is also always an important part of the support we provide. Another thing that we've supported many individuals to access and deploy effectively during these time are these switch control devices. So people, it's particularly people with mobility issues who struggle with the use of touchscreen devices. So actually these relatively affordable switch controls provide a major advantage to a number of people. So the switch to navigate through pages and select items. So, you know, the task can be achieved much more quickly. So particularly people who are being expected to do work from home during the crisis period, looking at their, you know, their mobility challenges and deploying switch controls has proved really advantageous to this group of people. Yeah, the note here is that you can use more than one switch on a device. Most smartphones tend to limit it to 2, but with a laptop you can actually configure to support many of these switch controls. So it's really worth bearing in mind. And again, other features that are, you know, are being really well received at the moment. So you were just talking about captions on Zoom and how you make sure that can happen. That's a setting well back in the administrative level. So you need to make sure those are set up. But equally, you know, configuring headphones, that can be a really important feature for some people, so that they only play sounds out of one ear only. Sound detection, so that you can detect certain sounds, an important feature, but also hold and delay, tap duration. I'm just reading from the screen now. Hold and delay so that you can touch and hold things. Tap duration so that your screen interaction takes an identify as a tap, and repeated touches. So there are different configurations that have been really useful to some individuals that have been supported during this time. Again, not all devices have all of these features, so an initial assessment helps individuals to access the support that's most beneficial to them. So I'm just going to talk about a case study that we've been really excited about, that and it's fair to say this case study would have been remarkable. It's not necessarily about the crisis period itself, because what's happened here is remarkable and worthy of commentary. The fact that it's happened during the crisis, perhaps even more so remarkable, but as I say, it's not specific to the crisis period. So the individual we've been supporting, we've anonymised it, is David, who was an apprentice and looking to a motorcycle mechanical engineering type of apprenticeship, but suffered a severe brain injury as a result of road traffic accident. We helped, my colleague Simon helped David with the acquisition of skills, communication using text to speech, browsing Facebook and talking with friends and family on Messenger, watching online videos, control, over smart home devices. That was something that was already happening. Switch controls was something that Simon had supported David to access and deploy reasonably well. And then they got the chance, my colleague and David got an opportunity to work with a researcher at Coventry University, and was looking at various hardware deployments excuse me, that could further assist David. And they got the opportunity to do some trial and influence on a piece of software developed and deployed by, well, no, it's hardware and software, forgive me. So Tobii is a Swedish organization looking at wearables, so actual, eyewear, and the technology. The eyewear is called eye gaze, the software behind it is called the grid. So they've been part of this testing and pilot for the hardware and software deployment. And the really good news about us positioning, this person and the link up with research and the link up with industry is that Tobii are going to look very much more at deployment for accessibility, whilst at the same time developing their hardware in particular for mainstream use. So eye gaze and eye tracking functionality has a mainstream, a major part of mainstream market. But I think it's really useful that we've helped them to see how much benefit it can bring in specific accessibility challenges. I lost the screen share there for some reason.
I'm going to have to probably stop you in about a minute, if that's all right.
No, absolutely, I'm nearly there, Sarah. So if I just go back to the screen. The other thing I want, so yeah, you'll all get the screens and you can look at Tobii and their work, and the devices and the software that they're supporting. I won't dwell on that because you can look that detail up. The other thing I did want to stress though, for those of you not familiar, was a national partner we work with regularly called AbilityNet. So AbilityNet are there and they are funded to deliver support for accessibility, specifically digital accessibility. They have a whole suite of support under their initiative called My Computer, My Way, and they're able to do one-to-one calls and support. And they looked at, they've got their top 10 hacks for disabled people working from home. So there's a lovely resource here. And that was my final point to highlight, really. So thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute today.
That's fantastic. Thanks ever so much. That's brilliant. So we've had a few questions in the chat box. Before I go to those, has anybody not been able to use the chat box who would like to just briefly unmute and ask a question? Anyone? Okay, well, I have to think about questions. I'm just going to go through some of the ones that have appeared. So early on, there was a question for, or from Ben to everyone. He said, interested in Tigger's view on the impact of information from so many sources, social media and the anxiety of comparing self to normal, comparing our real world with people's curated false reality. I don't know if any of the speakers want to comment on that one, or if it was more of a comment, or
I don't know if that happened for everybody, but you froze for a little bit during reading that question. Would you mind reading one more time? It's also quite a big question that's just going to take me a minute to digest.
Yes, no problem. I will read it again. So it's from Ben, and he said he's interested in Tigger's view on the impact of technology, in particular, the fact that we're drowning in information from so many sources. Also social media and the anxiety of comparing self to normal, comparing our real world with people's curated false reality. Yeah, definitely quite a lot in there. I don't know if any of the speakers want to comment on that. No?
I was waiting to see if others wanted to go in. I'm happy to contribute, Sarah, if it's helpful.
Sounds great.
I think that, and I saw a comment in the chat stream as well about the impact on, the psychological impact on this situation. And I know Tigger commented several times really usefully for me, a really good set of points about the impact on psychological state for all of us, let's be clear, but one that we need to be alert to for people suffering mental health challenges preceding and during the crisis. It's a massive, it plays on my mind a great deal. We have a team of 40 people, and I am constantly challenging myself to think about their well-being, their mental health, as well as their physical. So we're doing DSE assessments of every homeworking situation to make sure that we're encouraging people to think about physiology. But psychology is very much on my mind, and I think we have to continue to challenge ourselves to improve, constantly improve.
Yeah, that was it. I think Helen from AGK asked, can I ask our speakers about the psychological impact of home working, especially for people who are living alone? I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. Am I lost?
No, I got you.
Oh, cool.
I can comment to that. I work from home anyway, but I didn't realise until the lockdown how much I actually needed to have the interaction with other people. Then emotionally, with all the other stuff that's happening around, you become quite fragile living through a computer. I think, as Tigger said, looking through this box, this becomes your space. And, there is this thing that disabled people have known for a long time, which is touch hunger, that, we as humans, we do need to touch and to hug and to have some, some level of, and also picking up on, even though I'm visually impaired, I spend a lot of my time picking up on people's small gestures, and, that's how we empathize. It's really important for me, especially as a writer, as a person. I love being with people and picking up on all kinds of other sensory information that you get, and it's very disorienting to not have that in your life over a protracted period of time, plus the huge existential angst. Just happens to be a pandemic behind you. So I've loved, loved the quiet. Oh my God, I love the quiet. And I especially with hyperacusis, that the noise of traffic coming back now, that's really makes me emotional, because I have just so loved the peace and the quiet. But I have really missed the human connection. My guide dog gets so lots of, she's like, get off me.
And just saying, if I may as well, that there's that misconception sometimes that people who are also autistic don't want to touch people, do not want relationships, do not want friendships. That's a bit of a lie as well. That desperate need is there. All that's supported to a certain extent by this technological revolution is that the clutter that goes with it has gone. But as you know, you said the issues around being touch devoid, incredibly important. My daughter's amazing, awesome, superb. We have a 2-tap hug system. When I go to grab her and hug her, depending on how much and how intense her anxiety levels are, when I could grab her and hug her, she'd either tap twice quickly or tap twice slowly. That would, dictate the extent of our hug, because you could only take a hug at certain levels of time due to anxiety and stress. And so many individuals, this connectivity here is devoid of that physical aspect, and also there is so much communication aspect from looking, from seeing, from smelling, from tasting, and so on, which we don't get in this technological world. And it is, as other people have said, you're drowned. I'm drowned by all these images here. I'm drowned by PowerPoints. I'm drowned by, the massive screen there, and so on and so forth. And it is a real learning journey for us, as well as so many other people that we know and live with and support, and so on.
Definitely. Very strange to have so many little boxes everywhere. Nothing to feel. So we're going to attempt, there are more questions in the chat box, but I'm going to attempt to give us a chance to break out, even just for kind of 5-10 minutes. Each group hopefully will have a member of the Inclusivity Project team, so we can take notes. We've got Google Docs for each group. Or just, feel free, there's various questions that you can talk about, but feel free to pick one that is of interest to you, or just to pick up on any of the themes that have come out in the talks that you'd like to talk more about. So I think Lucy is going to do some kind of wizardry to make us all appear in small groups, and then she'll bring us back at around 20 past, and we'll just maybe have one kind of take-home message from each group, just to give everyone a bit of a chance to chat and talk. So over to you, Lucy.
So I will now attempt to put you all into groups. If you don't get put in a group, you'll just come back here and I can assign you to a group, so don't panic. I'll drop in each group and make sure you've all got a Google Doc. So here goes, fingers crossed. If you come back, don't worry. Just let me know and I'll pop you in a group. Right.
This is always the moment of truth.
Hopefully. Some people are being assigned now. It's slowly happening. Here we go.
Oh. Looks like we're coming back. I don't know about anyone else. We didn't get much beyond the chatting and introducing ourselves and picking up on a couple of key points. But there seems to be potentially some appetite for this to be the start of a conversation, and that perhaps we can actually pick up some of the things that have come out and have follow-on sessions around it and link people back up again. I won't carry on yet until we know. Lucy, let me know when we're all back in the right space.
We should all be back in now.
Excellent. Fab. Okay. So I was just saying, I don't know about anybody else, but we didn't really get past the kind of introducing who we were and the kind of briefly what had come out of it. But hopefully this is just the start of a bigger conversation, and there might be follow-up events that we could do or activities to relink people together and use this as hopefully a useful channel. But I think I'm going to hand over to Ruth now, who's actually going to talk about some of the business support opportunities through the Inclusivity Project. Ruth, did you want me to, have you got a slide? Yeah, you're fine, done.
Okay. Now, is that showing up for people?
Yes, if you slideshow it, perfect.
I'm going to do basically the briefest version of this because I know there's just a few minutes. But I just wanted to very briefly highlight what the Inclusivity Project can offer, I suppose, to organisations based here in Cornwall. So as well as the research side of the project that Sarah touched on at the start of the event, we are funded by ERDF, and we are here to support local small and medium-sized enterprises. So that might be businesses, that might be charities, that might be CICs. So whatever type of organisation you are, it's worth having a think, getting in touch with us to see whether there's something that we can work on with you. Essentially, very simply, the way it works is that we would talk to you, first of all, about what is your business, what is your idea, what are you trying to do, you know, what do we have to offer, and how can we help you? So it would always start with that conversation about really understanding where you are and where you're trying to get to, and from there we would explore whether and how we can help you. So that might be about connecting you up with colleagues on the team and colleagues at our partner organisations, so many of them here on the call today, Sarah and colleagues at the University of Exeter, Claire at the LEP, Vaughan and colleagues at Disability Cornwall, and Helen and her colleagues at Age UK. So there is a range of different experiences, perspectives, skills that we can offer. So our time is fully funded, so it's free to you to access, and that might be about providing our time to help you on a question or a problem that you're grappling with. It might be about small scale grant funding to help sort of get an idea off the ground. So there are different ways that we can potentially support you, but I guess the main thing I would say is, if you're interested in this question of health and inclusion in the workplace, and you've got an idea for a product or a service or something that you might like to develop and offer to the world, or something that you want to try within your own organisation, and you could just use a bit of help to develop it or explore it, then get in touch and we can talk about whether we can help you and work with you in that way. So my name's Ruth. I think details will go through in a follow-up email. So like I say, just get in touch. And Sarah had also asked if I could touch on what will happen next or from this event. So we will, as I said, we'll get a follow-up email out to everybody, and we'll try and include some of the useful links and resources that people have touched on. We have recorded today's event. Some people have asked about that. It will take us a little while just to sort of tidy up the edges, and you don't need our chit chat before we got started. So we'll send that round just as soon as it's available. And we are always interested to hear your thoughts on what would be useful and how we might take this forward. As Sarah said, it sounds like there's been some ideas on that today, but essentially today's discussion will feed into our work, future events that we put on, and how we take this forward. I will stop talking now and hand back to Sarah.
Can I just say that we've got another Inclusivity Project webinar coming up. Our next one will be on the 30th of June, and it's called What is Bias? And look out, because we'll be scheduling more and more webinars as time goes on, and we're really chuffed that people have been attending all of these sessions. And if you have suggestions for topics you'd really like us to cover, please also get in touch. Or if you would like to be a speaker at one of our webinars, we'd love to hear from you and put you together with other people into more of these great conversations.
Thank you, Laura, that's fab. And hopefully we might get the captioning working for next time, and we will sort out the slides and things as well. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our speakers, to our participants. Hopefully, as we said, this is the start of a bigger conversation. I'm aware there's lots of voices that haven't been heard today. But yeah, thanks so much for joining, and we'll be in touch with the follow-up